What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Tech Backstage. My name is Eddie, here with my co-host Tulio and our guest for today, Everaldo from PagerDuty. How you all doing today?
Great.
Doing great.
Awesome. I love
Awesome.
the intro music. I'm over here rocking out to it. Gets you in a good mood.
Yeah, for sure. Everaldo, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So interesting topic today. I think something that I'm extremely passionate about, especially considering talking about how I kind of broke into the software engineering. And obviously data science is a little bit different than software engineering, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But really interesting topic, one that both Tulio and I are really passionate about. So I'd love to hear you just maybe, give a quick intro about yourself, talk about where you're from, where you're at right now, because I know that was probably a little bit of a journey for you, and, talk a little bit about how you got to PagerDuty.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm glad to see that you're still here, by the way. I heard you dropped in the last podcast, so that's a great start. So anyway, my name is Everaldo. I am originally from Brazil, so I've been in the US for about 15 years. Today, I live in Seattle, Washington with my partner and our cat, who may make an appearance here in a second. I came to the US as an exchange student, lived in Idaho, then moved to Oklahoma, then went to school in Texas, got my undergraduate at a school there called Midwestern State, computer science, then immediately transitioned into a PhD program at the University of Notre Dame, where I learned both about computer science and football. And so as part of that program, I had the opportunity to join a data science for social good fellowship in Chicago. And that's what kind of exposed me to data science and to impactful problems in data science that were really tangible and interesting. And that's how I started my data science journey. After graduate school, I moved to Seattle, joined a company called Concur here. At the time, they had just been acquired by SAP. We started a data science team there and worked on a lot of really interesting projects. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about that. I then moved on to Shopify, where I was for about a year. And as you mentioned, I'm now part of the data science org at PagerDuty. So that's the elevator spiel.
Cool, dude. That's quite a journey for sure, especially starting out in Idaho as an immigrant into the U.S. That's not kind of an unconventional place to land, right?
To say the least, yeah. It was interesting.
Cool, dude. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing right now, and I think part of this is you work at PagerDuty, but you're also doing some teaching on the side, which is why we chose to talk about this topic, because it's obviously something that you're very passionate about. But you're teaching on the side right now, and one of the things that you're noticing is that people, how many people are applying for jobs, not even getting offers, not even getting responses, which to me is a little bit mind-blowing with the current state of the workforce. Tulio's favorite data point, 9 to 10 software engineering jobs for every engineer out there right now. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing right now in the workforce and with your students in particular.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting what you mentioned. I think the perception that most people have is that there's a huge number of openings in tech in general, in data science and engineering. But on the other side of the coin, you also have a lot of people who are applying for jobs, are never hearing back, are starting to get really frustrated, are starting to not really believe their own skill set and are giving up, or maybe transitioning into other roles, which may also be contributing to how many openings are there. There's also a little bit of an imbalance between openings in more senior roles, which are a little bit more difficult to source and to find people with the right skill sets, and an overload of applicants for more junior roles. So that's where you see a lot of the people who are applying for jobs not hearing back. It's mostly on that entry-level type of role. For data science specifically, I think an interesting data point is that you tend to have candidates coming from all different fields. So a lot of the candidates that we get applying for our jobs are coming from inherently quantitative backgrounds. So you end up competing with people not only from computer science backgrounds, but also math, biology. I've had people with law degrees apply for data science roles. Someone who was a barista at Starbucks at one point. So that competition is really fierce. And not only do you compete with people from different backgrounds who are really capable, but you're also nowadays competing with people from different geographies. So it's really expanded. When companies are searching for candidates, they are not only just looking around where they are geographically, they're going beyond state borders and country borders. So you are inevitably competing with a lot more people than you used to be.
Yeah.
Sounds like something's broken. When I hear this kind of disparity, I can't help to think there's a problem somewhere. And either the people that don't understand what the role is, or the companies don't understand how to source for the type of person that they're looking for. Maybe they're looking for a unicorn. What's the underlying issue, you think, that makes this so difficult to match up?
Yeah, I think you touch on a good point. I think sometimes companies are looking for a unicorn that may or may not exist, right? And that's also part of what's been driving salaries higher and higher in the past year or so. It's just that there's a lot of competition between companies. So not only are you competing with candidates who are trying to take that role, but you're also competing against this new thing that companies are doing, of just going out and trying to poach candidates from other companies that already have the experience that they're looking for, that have shown that they can drive impact there. Yeah, I think that's a good point you bring up. A lot of the times, like, people really are looking for unicorns that may exist or may not exist here.
Well, just to paint the picture a little bit, I knew someone, a young person, a couple of years ago who graduated with a data science degree. He also had some engineering skills, and every time she applied for a position, they seemed to be putting her towards the engineering role because that's where the biggest demand was. And it's like, I don't want to be an engineer. I just learned that skill, so I wanted to understand what happens. How does the algorithms and things that I work on get implemented? And at one point, she removed that skill set or that knowledge from her resume because she kept getting pigeonholed into something she didn't want to do. Is it because the majority of the folks applying for data science roles also come from an engineering background? Is that part of what's causing some of the confusion, where companies think, oh, we want a data scientist and also an engineer all in one package? But most people kind of like one or the other. Their competency is one or the other. They might have gotten a little taste of one thing, but they're really good at another thing. What are your thoughts? What's like, we're trying to break it down to what's going on. I guess maybe we may not achieve that today, but at least maybe highlight some of the key issues that companies should be aware of.
Yeah, I actually agree with you here. I think a lot of the times you get this influx of candidates and really good people applying for data science roles, and it's a bit easier to get candidates that match the expectations for a data science role, let's say, than it is to get someone who is a DevOps, for example, or someone that has both the data skills, but also a level of comfort in writing code and being a developer. So when you end up like breaking your way into a data science roles, from time to time, you will find yourself in a position where there's a need for you to kind of transition a little bit into a role that relies more on development and your engineering skills, because it is harder to source those candidates that have some amount of data science knowledge, but are also competent in writing code and shipping things to production. And those are harder to find unicorns. And the data science pipeline does tend to attract like a lot more candidates that may not have the same level of comfort writing code and shipping things to production. So when you do find someone that has both things, like, there definitely is a gravitational pull towards like more engineering focused roles.
Why do you think? What do you think's driven that shift? It's like, Tula, you've been in this industry a lot longer than I have. You guys weren't looking for full stack unicorns, back in the 90s and early 2000s, were you? I mean, like, we had data scientists and we had, back end engineers and we had machine learning engineers. And it's like, but now all of a sudden companies are like, well, we need somebody who can do everything. Like, what's driven that change? Is it budgetary? Is it just the fact that, they don't want to split the role up? I mean, I find it, in my experience, people who are actually specialists work better than generalists.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I want to just add to that. For example, when you go back before open source, right, started eating the world, before software started eating the world,
Node modules.
The biggest investors into data science were banking. They called them analysts. They had different names for them, right? Quant scientists. I mean, they had different names for what these guys were doing. But in essence, for 20 plus years before this became popular, the banking industry was already investing in a lot of this. But those were not engineers at all. So that's a really good question. When did it become like needed that you had to do both? Like, when did that happen?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I think what has changed in the recent years is the fact that there now are some data science applications that you can actually embed to your product and you can ship to production and you can see the impact on your customers. And maybe this wasn't the case maybe 10, 20 years ago. For instance, the product we worked at Concur that my team developed there with some collaboration, it required a lot of data science, a lot of machine learning, but it was something that was embedded in the product. So it also required a lot of development, a lot of engineering skills. And so that idea of like actually taking a machine learning model and embedded into a product is relatively new. So having to find people that have that data science skill set, but that are also willing to dive a little bit into how to ship that into a product is a bit more recent than things that only required being like on one side of the coin here.
I'm on mute, by the way, guys. So no, I generally agree with you too, is like, and there's this, Tulio, like you said, to your point, really great point about how open source has driven product development, is that now all of a sudden, back in the day when you wanted to do something, you had to spin it up on a bare metal server yourself, and you had to go in and actually, install everything yourself, do everything yourself. And now with open source, you're actually able to build these platforms and these products, on smaller pieces of code that other people have previously written, right? But now we're seeing this, I don't want to call it like a plague or something, but if you look at how people develop products nowadays, a lot of times it's very dependent on things that other people have written previously, right? And to your point, Everaldo, is actually embedding these machine learning, the algorithms, these pieces of code or these models into products. Yeah, you're right. Like that's becoming a thing, but if you still look at some of the biggest companies right now, they're still running, these separate services behind the scenes. And it still requires data scientists to actually sit down and analyze the models and actually understand how to build the models and understand what the, what the dependent variables are to get to the expected results, right? Because if you just feed a bunch of data into a model and a lot of it's not relevant to what you're looking to predict, you're not going to end up with an accurate model, right? And so, there's people trying to take these shortcuts to just get into a, really quick machine learning model that, is built into the application. But the true quality models are actually built with data scientists, right? And I think that's something that quality models take time to develop, right?
Most definitely.
Yeah. So let's circle back to the topic. I think I was starting to steer off to the left a little bit there, guys.
Well, we also had a troll come in our chat line, so that was always interesting.
Did you see that? I did.
I will discipline my cousin, Demonic Microwave.
Oh, is that your cousin?
No. It's on Twitch. Or it's watching on Twitch.
Good stuff.
To me. Good.
Sorry. All right. Let's circle back. But okay. So getting back to the topic at hand, data science jobs and, actually applying to data science jobs and getting data science jobs. let's talk about diversity for a second, because I think one of the things that is really important nowadays, and a lot of companies talk about this, is diversity, right? And I think everybody wants to be a more diverse company, but we know, based on statistics and what we see in the industry, is that still, kind of a male driven industry, and there's still, um, you know, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but there's still those things happening, right? Um, as somebody who's not from the US originally, what was your path like to from Brazil into the US, and then eventually from college into getting a job? And what are the things that you're seeing right now going on with diversity in the industry?
Yeah, I think that's the most loaded question I've ever
Sorry
gotten
about
in my
that.
entire life. But
But
let me try to break it down.
very
Like,
valid.
so I think there's a lot of aspects to diversity that are important to touch on. It is a difficult problem in the tech space. It is, and as you were talking about backstage, Eddie, there's a big difference between companies that are talking about what they're doing in terms of diversity and what they're actually doing. And sometimes there is a willingness to do something, but it's still really difficult to see that materialize. I think sourcing a diverse pool of candidates is inherently difficult. I think a lot of companies need to find the right approach to doing that. What I've learned and what worked for me in the past was starting by recognizing that I myself may not be able to source the right pool of diverse candidates. And a lot of people who are in the sourcing business are not really willing to admit that they don't have the power to source a pool of diverse candidates. And so they won't reach out to someone who may be able to do that job better than they can. And I think that's worked really well for me in the past, which was to first admit that I may not be able to source a really strong woman of color candidate onto my team, but someone on my team who may be a really competent data scientist who happens to be a woman may do a much better job at that. So sharing that sourcing responsibility and power with someone else that may do a better job than I can is a good starting point. But there's still a lot of resistance from people in admitting that maybe they're not the best ones to go and do that.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the second half of your question, I think when I look back at my journey, I do think that I was privileged in many ways, despite being an immigrant. I was able to get a really great education. Like, my parents were always supportive. So there's a lot of people who have to go through a lot more trouble than I did to get to the same place. But I did have some experiences that were interesting as well. So as an immigrant, I think even the fact that I see a lot of people today changing their names in their resume to appeal more to an American-centric hiring process. My wife actually is also an immigrant, and she ran an A/B test where she applied to a bunch of jobs with her real name and a bunch of jobs with a fake American name, and the response rate from those jobs were much higher. And in fact, she was hired with a resume that had a fake American name. So nowadays, I think her coworkers don't even know what her real name is, which is interesting.
Wow.
But yeah, there's a lot of interesting challenges that you face, both as an immigrant, but also a candidate from a minority background.
Wow. So what's the lesson for companies here? If you want to be truly inclusive, it cannot be limited to everyone coming from Stanford. I'm not singling out Stanford here. That's not my intent. I'm just using that as an example, right? I mean, so there's a challenge in terms of, you just laid it out, sounding more Americanized, but there's also the challenge of your pedigree, if you will, quote unquote. What do companies need to do? Do they need to expand how they perceive what a data scientist is and what they are capable of? Is there also an outreach that needs to happen to invite more people into STEM roles, into STEM jobs that are more diverse? Is it a combination of the two? What has been your understanding so far?
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying that this is a personal opinion, but I think companies have to be more willing to give people a chance, right? I think a lot of the times people are just waiting going back to the idea of looking for a unicorn. Like they're waiting for a candidate from a minority background that already comes with a skill set and experience and graduated from Stanford and is ready to do the job. And before they find that candidate, someone else who doesn't fit all of the criteria here comes along and gets hired, right? So I think before all the time goes by and you find your unicorn, I think you have to be willing to give someone a chance and offer them a platform to become that unicorn after they join your company. And I don't see many companies like having that willingness because they just want to hire a candidate that's already strong and ready to start driving impact immediately.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I don't want to dive too far off the diversity track here yet because there's one other point that I wanted to bring up. But I think you just hit the nail on the head, right? Anytime somebody is recruiting and hiring for a position, at least in my experience, they're really looking for that resume that says, you know, it's almost got like the neon lights that says at the top that, hey, I can do what you need me to do with 0 to no training. You know, like, or sorry, 0 to little training, right? Like they're really looking for that guarantee of success with little investment from their part. And they're looking, especially building products and models and machine learning models. It's like that stuff's hard, and so they want to find the person who can just come in and do it. And so it's not just about minorities, it's really about hiring. People are always looking, and again, we circle back to the unicorn. People are always looking for somebody who's like a guaranteed win for them. And you have to invest in people nowadays. Like I think that's a really important thing. And that brings me to my next point, which is you brought up a really good point about sometimes it's hard to find somebody who fits a minority profile and also checks all the boxes. But does that start before the recruiting process? Does it start with better access to education? Does it start with promoting that these types of jobs exist earlier on in people's lives? Like I didn't know I could be a software engineer in high school. You know what I mean? I thought it was just something we did for fun. But giving people in that don't live in the suburbs or go to private schools, like giving them access to the tools to actually learn about these career paths and potentially develop their skills and get on that path earlier in life. What do you guys think?
I totally agree. And in addition to all of what you mentioned, I think we have a scarcity of role models, like people that have a similar background to yours that ended up in a place where you might want to be in the future. And you just don't usually see someone that's similar to you in background and that got to a position that you may be interested in being at one point if you're from a minority background. So I think that's also something that is starting to change a bit, but it doesn't happen as often.
Yeah.
So based on all this, let's face the reality of what it is, right? Someone might be watching this now or later and say, you know what, I want to really go down this path. What do I need to do to get a data science job? How do I effectively do that? Bias aside, how do I overcome that and position myself to win at this game of being a data scientist?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I usually like to break down the expectations for a data scientist into 4 categories. And so you do need to be comfortable writing code. So you need to be a relatively good developer. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be the next best developer in the universe, but you need to have some exposure to writing code.
So just really quickly, that increases your likelihood of being looked at or considered if you have also engineering skills, software engineering skills.
Definitely. For the vast majority of data science roles, I would say so.
Okay.
You also need to have some level of comfort with machine learning, data science techniques, and different methods. And you have to know when to apply which one of those. The other thing is you need to know how to manipulate data. So having some comfort with SQL, different querying languages, and knowing how to work with data in general. And the one that I think it's usually overlooked, but that to me is really important, especially at senior level roles, is communication skills. So a lot of what you're going to be doing as a data scientist is describing your work gathering information from stakeholders, like learning about the business context of your problem. And that's a skill set that's arguably like the most difficult one to acquire. And so a lot of the candidates that, when it gets to the point where we have to make a hiring decision, it gets to a discussion around like, would these people be good at bridging the gap between data science and their stakeholders, like in terms of communication. And so training and practicing like storytelling and describing your work is a skill set that's really important when you're looking for data science jobs. And I think it's also interesting to bring that up because it's something you can practice and get better at outside of the stressful environment of an interview. Right? So as a student, you get to present your work. In class, you get to practice presentation skills, and so there's a lot that you can do to get better at that. But it is a requirement and an expectation that I feel is often overlooked.
Yeah, I think that's
tips.
Yeah, I was going to start to talk over you, Tulio.
No, go ahead.
Were you, just out of curiosity, when you were in college, were you ever able to intern? And if so, did that help, you on your path into where you're at now?
I wasn't an intern per se, but I was a fellow at the Data Science for Social Good fellowship. It's sort of as like being an intern, and it most definitely helped. I got a chance to work with stakeholders and partners, and I was thrown in the mix and expected to do a lot of stuff that really did help me develop like both my data science skill set, but also the ability to communicate between data science work and stakeholders. But getting an internship is definitely something that's really beneficial if you're trying to get into data science.
Yeah. Did you ever, kind of like a sidebar here, but did you ever have a mentor that helped you along the way?
Several.
Okay.
And I think, and it's definitely something I would definitely recommend for anyone that's trying to get into data science. Find a mentor. There's a lot of people who are willing to donate their time to talk to you and help you along the way.
Yeah, I agree. That was one of the things years ago. I was feeling lost, and I actually just reached out to some people that it's kind of like a long shot. I was like, no, these guys aren't going to want to talk to me. And we've been really I've been really fortunate that these people have come in and taken me under their wing, and I talk to them, once or twice a month right now, and it's been huge. And I think that mentoring and mentorship are definitely important parts of the process, right? And I also think that if you can get an internship, I think it's huge. But I think mentors right now are a big part of our industry. I think it's everybody's seen, that senior software engineer mem that's, holding back all the arrows and the junior developers like down there, with their first PR. And I mean, I think that's really the way that this industry works, right? Because I think when you're in university, I think it teaches you the fundamentals and it teaches you the theory, right? But in order to actually learn how to be somebody that can operate in this industry, build great products, you really need to be able to sit down and get your hands dirty, instead of just, taking the book learning and trying to apply it, right?
Yeah. Well, and one last thing on that topic, if I can bring that up, is it going back to the theme of unicorns. Like when you're looking for a mentor, that mentor doesn't really need to be a unicorn either. Like your peer can be a great mentor.
Yeah,
I've learned so much from my reports in the past. Like people who reported to me have taught so much, and so anyone can be a mentor if you're willing to make them.
You said some interesting things today that reminded me of a lot of the principles in design thinking. It sounds as though one of the key to becoming a good data scientist, or even becoming an attractive candidate as a data scientist, is the ability to connect to the problems that you're trying to solve, the people that are involved with those problems, listening, learning, adapting, prototyping before you actually apply any science to it. So those are good skills to have for sure. It seems like there's a lot that goes into it. All right. Well, it's been great to have you. We're up on time. Any final words of wisdom you want to share for someone maybe sitting on the fence about pursuing a data science job? Maybe this this podcast is going to scare them or, give them some good tips. Let's share any final words of wisdom. Why is it worth it? Why is it worth it?
Yeah, definitely don't be scared. It's a really exciting field, very dynamic. I think for myself personally, I have a background in computer science. I was never the best developer, and I found that data science was a really great kind of middle ground where I still got to write code, but work on really intellectually challenging problems. So it's a really exciting field. Don't be scared. It can be a little bit difficult to get into it, but once you do, a lot of what you'll learn will transition to other roles, and you don't need to be a unicorn. You don't have to have a PhD necessarily. Maybe we'll get to that topic on a different conversation, but keep trying. It'll be difficult. It's very competitive, but don't give up.
Great. Well, it's been great to have you as our guest today. This was very educational. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Stay with us, Everaldo, as we go off the air in just a second. We'll do a quick wrap up. Come back on Tuesday next week. We'll be back at 11:15 a.m. Pacific, 1:15 p.m. Central. And be on the lookout for the postings on your social networks to see what the calendar looks like. We'll put that out there probably on Monday. Thanks for being with us, and enjoy your weekend, everyone. Be safe.
Thanks, Everaldo. We'll see you later. Bye.
Thanks, guys.